Today's game was played at the Tradewise Gibraltar Catalan Bay GIB Tournament 2017, and this game was played between Borya Ider and Yifan Hou, two very strong level female grandmasters. And Ider has the white pieces, Yifan Hou has the black pieces. This is a pretty fascinating game. So we're just going to go quickly through the opening so that way we can get to the action and get to the really important strategic concepts that I want to teach today. Alright, it's about to get interesting. Ider goes ahead and plays g4, which is a pretty interesting move. It does open up her king side, and she's just looking to prevent black from having too much space and to try and stop black's attack a little bit. And here, it's simply knight to g5. So Ider is allowing the bishop to defend g4 and threatening stuff like knight to e6, which would fork the queen, the rook, and the bishop, and also the knight would be very good on e6. Now, a lot of people might just play queen out to e7 and just allow white to have this really good knight, but instead of that, Yifan plays knight takes d5, which is extremely surprising. Yeah, a lot of spectators, when they saw this, they thought that she must have just blundered, because after knight to e6, it looks like that after maybe the queen moves, that simply pawn takes knight, and black would be down by a piece. So that seemed like a pretty bad position. But she plays knight takes c3 here, another surprise. Yeah, Yifan Hou sacrifices her queen. Now, if queen takes on c3, if Ider were to just avoid taking the queen, then she will actually get into some trouble here. Yeah, materially right now, black is down by a pawn, but in order to stop the attack, Ider would have to play a move like e4. Yes, if Ider plays something just like rook a to d1, just a normal looking move, then after rook to f3, we can see that rook h3 is threatened and black is doing really good here. Yeah, there could be checkmates that follow here. And of course, you know, if bishop takes, that's not good either, because then queen takes here, or maybe even queen out here, followed by checkmate. So in order to avoid that and avoid a huge loss of material, the computer says that e4 is actually the best move. And then we have material that's equal, but even though it appears to be an equal game, Yifan is much better positionally and would go on to win this. Ider's bishop on h2 is simply a very bad bishop. It is very passive and locked inside the pawn chain. This restricted bishop is actually the theme of this entire game, and we're going to talk about this in greater detail in just a little bit. But that was one idea. Instead, though, Ider goes ahead and takes the queen, and then we have knight takes e2 check, bishop f3. This is a very important in-between move. Yifan is simply locking down white's kingside and further restricting the bishop on h2. The bishop on h2 could get into the game after a move like f3, f4, and simply bishop to h3 prevents that from happening. Now, Ider could have simply taken back the bishop in order to reduce the complications, to simplify the game, but she would have ended up in an unfavorable endgame position with the pawn down. So that is really not something that she would want to go into. But I would have definitely simplified the game pretty fast. Instead we see queen out to d3, knight c5, and rook f takes d8. Now that we have seen the tactics through, let's take a closer look at the position and see who is better. From a material standpoint, Yifan has two minor pieces, a knight and a bishop, and a pawn versus a queen. So she is down by 2 pawns. From a strategic standpoint, though, she has several pluses. Her greatest strategic advantage is how she is able to restrict Ider's bishop on h2. By placing her bishop on f3, she is able to prevent f3 to f4, which is really good, and thus can greatly restrict this bishop for a very long time. Aside from that, she has a few minor strategic pluses like a great outpost for her knight on c5 and control of the only half-open file for her rooks. And rooks do really well in open positions. But as you can see here, the position is pretty closed on the board. And the only half-open file can only be occupied by Yifan thanks to her restricting bishop on f3. The theme of this game is how to restrict your opponent's pieces for a huge strategic advantage. Now, according to the computer, the game is dead equal here, and her strategic pluses are equal to about 2 pawns. Let's go ahead and see exactly why this is true. Let's take a look at the rest of the game. So Ider knows the importance of the f3 bishop and seeks to play rook out to e3 in order to drive this bishop away. Yifan does not want to allow that to happen, so she plays bishop out to h6. Now this bishop, as we will see in a few more moves, will also play a role in restricting white's bishop on h2. So it is able to do multiple things, which is really good. And Ider cannot sit idly by and wait to see what Yifan does. She has to play actively and is now looking to open up files for her rooks. This is also a very important theme. When you play chess, always look for ways to make your pieces better. Your opponent often will not help you, and you must create your own path. So therefore knight d4, and knight d4 is a very good idea by Yifan. It's just a simple threat of knight out to c2 forking the queen and the rook, but there's also another very important strategic idea that comes with this knight move, and that is simply to keep the d file closed. So this way, even if these pawns are traded off, the knight can still keep the d file closed, which is really good. b5, closing the game up to prevent white's rooks from gaining an open file. Bishop out to g3, simply trying to get out to h4 and then out to freedom. But instead we see bishop to g5 stopping that. And if Yifan had played something like g5 to stop the bishop, that would not be very good, because she would have locked in her own dark squared bishop. And then she would have been worse, because then both players would have had a really bad bishop. So instead of that, bishop to g5 is the best move. And then we see a4, Ider is very persistent. She is determined to crash through and open up the game. a6, Yifan wants to keep the game as closed as possible. Queen a3. Bishop takes g4. Yifan only captures this pawn after she has played knight out to d4. Now if Ider does play f3 or f4 to free her bishop, she will lose a great deal of material. There is also another idea behind capturing on g4. Yifan is now planning on pushing her past h-pawn up the board to either checkmate white or to create a queen. Yeah, so if f4 is played, then simply e takes f4, and although the material is equal, Yifan now has 3 passed pawns that can be pretty dangerous. So I think that black is a little bit better here, but there's still a lot of play that could happen, and white could also look to try to get the queen into the game. So it would have been interesting to see how that would have played out. Here, Ider plays rook out to d1. She offers to sacrifice the exchange just for some activity and also to reduce Yifan's control over these light squares. The idea is that if the bishops are traded off, then perhaps Ider could play something like rook out to d3 and then play f3, and get this bishop into the game. So that is the idea, but Yifan refuses the material in order to keep her opponent's king boxed in, and to also make her opponent's bishop stay passive for the rest of the game. So king g2, dx c5. And here, Ider has gained the d file, but what can she do with it? The very important squares like d6, d7, or d8, or even e6, all of those squares are controlled by black's pieces. So even though white has the d file, she's not able to do a whole lot with it. So that makes things a bit difficult. But she tries queen out to c6 in order to attack the c7 pawn, and Yifan simply defends that. h4 and the passed pawn rolls down the board. Bishop h2, b takes a4. And now we see queen out to a3, just trying to dislodge this knight over here. Yifan simply reinforces that knight, prevents that from ever happening. And here the computer says that the game is actually about equal, but then Ider makes a huge mistake here. She plays rook out to b5, and since the rook left the third rank, any piece that Yifan puts on f3 cannot be captured, at least on the move that is put on f3. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So simply a check, and then knight takes h2. So Yifan's idea is to play bishop out to f3 check on the next move, and because the rook has left the third rank, Ider is not able to capture that bishop. So let's see here. If king were to take on h2, then this would be a checkmate here pretty fast. And simply because the rook is not on the third rank, white is not able to stop that attack. So therefore white cannot capture the knight on h2. And instead tries to go in for the complications with rook takes e5. But Yifan flawlessly delivers her attack. She's not even concerned about the safety of her own king, because she knows that the attack will work itself out. So king g1, knight takes f1, and it looks like that black is running away and might be checkmated, but after queen h7 check king g4, Ider runs out of checking moves and the queen has to stay on the h file in order to prevent h3 to h2. So rook to e8 is simply a desperate move looking to sacrifice material in order to keep some checks on the board. But after rook takes e8, queen d7 check, king h4. See, the game went king takes f1, but if queen h7 check, then simply bishop h5. And after king f1, rook b8, simply threatening checkmate on the next move. So therefore f3 has to be played, and then we would have h2. And if king to e2, then I simply get a queen. And if the king tries to stop the passed pawn with king to g2, then there would be a checkmate here pretty soon. Yeah, simply bishop takes on f3 or rook to b1 would be checkmate. So there's really nothing that white can do there. In the actual game though, instead of queen h7 check, we see king takes on h1, or rather f1, rook to d8, queen h7 check, king out to g4. And here Ider resigns since checkmate is simply unavoidable. Yes, if queen out to d7, simply take the queen, play h2, and then checkmate. So this is a really awesome game played by Yifan Hou at the Gibraltar tournament in 2017. And she sacrificed her queen early on, was actually down by 2 pawns, and the entire idea here was simply to restrict the bishop on h2. And that turned out to be just as valuable as 2 pawns. So really exciting game, and I'll see you next time.